Welcome to Finding Your Financial Footing, Part 1, Life at UR. My name is Alejandra De Leon, and I'm the student coordinator for the First Gen program. Today we will be joined by Caroline Broadfoot, the Assistant Director of Financial Aid, to kickstart our series.
Feel free, I want this to be comfortable because that's how you learn, is by asking and stopping and making sure you understand. As you all are probably aware, you're students. So I'll go ahead and share my screen now. Just give me 1 second. Make sure I've got the right one. All right, can you all see that? Has a picture of like a foot lifting up. Perfect. So finding your financial footing, part 1 is life at UR. So this is getting your financial footing, getting your bearings or your sea legs about how to operate your finances as a student while you're here, because that's a little different than a lot of the things you may read online or hear in a personal finance class. It's talking a lot of times more about post-grad, things like saving to buy a home, which is still important, saving for retirement, things like that. But for this initial session, we really wanted to focus on what does that look like for you as a student, and specifically here at Richmond too. So, brief outline for tonight. Wanted to give you a little bit more brief introduction of myself, a little bit more of my background, just so you understand where I come from, and you know, that I'm not making this stuff up. Next, building and sticking to a budget, establishing and building credit, and finally, debt management. So before I jump into everything, just to give you a little bit of background on myself, again, I mentioned, you know, I'm an assistant director in the Office of Financial Aid. But before that, I was a lot of other things. I was a college student who didn't know anything about finances. I was an art history major. I bumped around from job to job post-grad because I didn't know what I wanted to do. I didn't know where I wanted to go, and I was scared to move to any cool city that I initially wanted to go to because I knew it was going to be expensive. And so I didn't, you know, take those opportunities. I'm at one point in my career actually became a financial advisor. So I did my own studying and research to get my licenses, which took a lot of work because I had only taken one personal finance class in college. That was 8 a.m. on Fridays my senior year. So I don't really remember too much from that. I don't think I took much away from that. I was probably half asleep during majority of that class. So I took it upon myself to get these licenses in order to become a financial advisor. And that's really where I would say I learned majority of what I know today. So I worked with Prudential Advisors, if you've heard of Prudential, and was a financial advisor there. I had my Series 6 and 65, and my Series, forgetting that, 63 as well. So I was a licensed professional. I no longer hold those licenses, so technically this is not professional advice tonight. But I'm not going to sit here and tell you to go consult your financial advisor on a lot of these things, because let's be honest, who has a financial advisor? I know I don't. A lot of times I know from experience, they charge fees to create financial plans. They might be nice enough. You might find one that'll sit down with you, you know, here and there, or at least one time for a session. But I'm not going to tell you to go do that, because that's just a lot of times not a tangible resource for people. So take what you will from tonight. It's coming from professional background, but not currently licensed advice. And just so you know, again, I work in the financial aid office, and I'm also currently, once again, a student. I am currently in the MBA program here at Richmond as well. So hoping to further my career and this knowledge as well. So I'm always learning as well too. All right, so let's jump in. First, I wanted to address with you all, let's just get down to the bare bones and the basics, because I don't know what you all know already, so I apologize if a lot of this just seems like basic, boring stuff that you already know, but I think it's important to start here, not only as a reminder, if you already are aware of this kind of stuff, but also just to maybe think of different things that you hadn't before, different approaches or opinions. It's always good to check in with yourself and with others. Um, you know, the financial world is fluid. Things change, the world changes. So a lot of this advice might not apply 20 years from now. So just knowing that and understanding that, I think it's important, but it's, you know, I wanted to start here just to start at that foundation level, which is creating a budget, because there are two components in a budget, and it's income and expenses. So some of the income that, you know, that I think a lot of times when people think income, they think money paid to them for a job or service that they perform. But as a student, that could look a little different. So income for a student, yes, it might be work if you have a job on campus or even off campus as well, but that could also be your financial aid refund. That's money coming to you in your pocket to use for expenses. If you have an allowance, maybe from your parents or family, or I don't have any friends that give me allowance, but maybe some people do, or gifts, you know, from holidays, birthdays, things like that. So don't get, you know, too, don't have the blinders on, I would say, when it comes to income, because it's not just traditionally the paycheck money that you get, but it can come in a lot of other forms as well. And I realized I left off one that you'll see on a later slide on this, but dining dollars as well. That's income, it's paying for your meals. So just remember to keep all of these things in mind when you're creating your budget. It's not strictly that paycheck that you may or may not receive. And when it comes to expenses, y'all are probably pretty familiar with these. There's tuition, books, supplies, room and board, so where you sleep and what you eat, whether that's on campus or off campus. Things like your phone, entertainment, so that can be either, you know, going and doing something, which I know is a little harder right now during COVID and everything, or it could even be your Netflix subscription or ordering a movie on demand and paying for it. So things like that. Expenses, the list could go on and on and on, but I just wanted to highlight some of the more obvious ones. But know that those expenses are going to look different for everyone, depending on, you know, your likes and your activities and things like that. So the first step in creating a budget, as you can probably imagine, is we'll determine your income. So as I mentioned before, it's not just paycheck money, but it's also financial aid refunds, dining dollars, if you have a work-study job. So in this example, we'll just call it student A, this is an example of their, let's just call it the fall semester income that they received. So they got a financial aid refund of $1,000. So that means that their aid exceeded their charges, and so they received $1,000 in order to be applied for the other expenses that they're going to incur as a student. With their meal plan, they also have their dining dollars for the semester. In this example, they earned $750 in work-study money. There could be other forms of income, but in this specific example, we're just going to total it to $2,590 in income for the semester. So as I'm going through these examples, you might want to, if you want to write it out on your own, like what that looks like for you, I suggest doing that so that you can work through it as we're going through it tonight, because that'll help you get a sense for things that you need to include, and you can start establishing that going forward. So when it comes to expenses, there are really two different kinds of expenses. You've got your, well, actually there are three different kinds when you're a student. So first we have identify those one-time school expenses for this. In this particular example, we're working on a per semester basis. So in this example, this student has books and digital resources they're going to pay for at the beginning of the semester for their classes, whatever supplies they need in addition to that. And in this example, I just threw in there that their computer crashed and they need a new computer. Now that could be anything depending on what happens or you have going on, but just to throw in some sort of emergency, unexpected expense. So just with those one-time school expenses, that totals to $1,700. Okay, so we're still in the green. Now let's look at those recurring expenses. So these are things, when you're thinking of recurring expenses, you want to think of expenses that you need to get by. These are kind of your, I have to eat, I have to, have shelter, and I need to maybe get somewhere. I threw in entertainment as well, just because it is recurring, but we'll get to needs and wants in a little. So recurring expenses in this particular scenario are, in this example, groceries, because this particular student is still buying some groceries on top of their dining dollars in their meal plan. Food delivery, which I'm sure is more prevalent now than it was before. Entertainment, again, that can be anything from a Netflix subscription to going into a concert when that's a thing again. Gas, Uber, or public transportation, and the student is forcing themselves to put away $50 per semester for emergency savings. So in total, that comes to $1,000 for their recurring expenses. I guess savings isn't really an expense, but I wanted to throw it in there. So when you're creating your budget, you have to look at income after taxes. Now that's important for really as a student, you're going to only experience taxes with any, if you have a work study job or a job off campus. But it's important to remember that taxes are a thing and they're going to be taken out and they're going to lower your paycheck. So make sure you know what your paycheck looks like after taxes or your net income. Add that again along with the other pieces of income. And does someone want to tell me if this student is, how are they faring in the semester? If you were to add up everything, and you can type in the chat box, you can come off video or your mic, whatever works easiest for y'all. Is this student okay? Do they need to maybe make some changes? So I'll go ahead and answer. So if you add up, you take the income, plug that into the income after taxes, and subtract out both types of expenses. This student is actually in the hole. I didn't have the math up here, but if we do it really quickly on my calculator, so you have 2590 minus 1700 and minus 1000. They're in the hole $110. Hopefully I did that correctly really quickly. So that's not good. So there are some changes that they may need to make in order to not be in the hole, as they say it. So when you're creating a budget, the goal is to have either that money to save or spend. I mean, ideally there's a number there. It's okay if it's zero, but you don't want that to be a negative number. So you want it to either net these two to net out the income and total expenses, or have a surplus at the end. And that would be your money that you can use to save or spend on activities or things that you may want. Which gets me to my next slide, needs versus wants. So you all may have heard this before. I'm sure you know the difference and definitions between needs and wants, but I think a lot of times when you're in the moment, we forget, or we don't take the time to pause and think, do I need this? Do I absolutely need this? Or is this just a want? Is this a want that I just, want to buy right now simply because maybe I'm in a bad mood and it's going to make me feel better? I know I was very guilty of that in college. I would reward myself for things here and there, which is okay in some instances, but I probably did it when I shouldn't have. Yeah, a lot of times when I was in a bad mood, I would go and treat myself to, whether it was, I don't know, something at the boutique that was on the street or Starbucks or what have you. So knowing wants and needs is one thing, but remembering to think, stop, pause, and think about that before you make purchases, or anytime you're about to, swipe a credit card or plug it in on your phone or use Apple Pay. I would, check in with yourself and say, do I really need this, or is this just a want? So as you can see, needs, they're the necessities for everyday living and goal attainment. So as you're working through this, ask yourself, what are your educational needs? Because you're a student right now. And what are those things that you need to get through each day? So it's not necessarily, your needs as for educational specific purposes, but what are the things that you need to get through each day? Wants, these are things that are nice to have or satisfy some desire or urge. So think about, what are some of the wants that you may think or need sometimes? I think a good example is, I think in this day and age, everyone, you could argue everyone needs a phone or a cell phone. So that could be a need. But do you need the latest model? Probably not. So there can be a want component with a need. And I think just remembering to stop and pause and think, okay, well, I know I need a phone or a new phone. Let's say it cracked or it's dead. But do I absolutely need the newest model? And that probably isn't the case. So just stop and pause and ask yourself that question. So making sure and learning and asking yourself, what are the distinguishing characteristics, or what distinguishing characteristics do wants have compared to needs? So just think about those different examples every day. The phone is one. Another one I could think of is the fact that I need to do my nails. I haven't done them since the beginning of COVID, but I mean, they need attention, but is that absolutely a necessity for everyday living and goal attainment for me? No, it's not. So that's a want. That's a distinguishing factor or characteristic of that want between a need. So when it comes to creating a budget, you lay out all of your information as we did before through that example student of your income and your expenses, and you have an idea of what's left over at the end of the day. Is it negative? Because that means we need to cut something here and there. Maybe we need to cut back on dining out or ordering food. Maybe we need to cancel a subscription somewhere. Or maybe we need to, you could flip it too. Maybe we could try to earn some more income, pick up some more hours at our campus job, or sell things online if you have a lot of maybe clothes that you don't wear anymore, things like that. So you could flip it either way. Just make sure, try to get a surplus if you can. If you can't, just make sure you're not going negative when you do that math equation. So when it comes to saving and spending, there's a rule of thumb out there, and it's called the 50-30-20 rule. So as you can see here, it breaks it down in terms of spending and saving. So I like this rule because it's simple. It's not too convoluted, and it gives people a really good idea of just basic. They can remember, okay, my expenses need to go, they can't exceed 50% of my net income. So whenever you hear net income, that means after taxes. So this is applied to your costs associated with needs and obligations. So just having that in the back of your mind when you're working through your budget, try to aim to not go above 50% with your absolute, need related expenses. Now, sometimes some may be unavoidable, and sometimes you might have it below 50%, which is a good thing. But it's just, again, a rule of thumb to keep in mind if you want to have some simple way of approaching your budget. As you can see, the next biggest portion is the 30%, which can be spent on non-essential or optional expenses. So, if we looked back a few slides on the different expenses out there, some were, kind of obligations, absolute, I cannot get by without paying for this. That's, where you live, what you eat, things like that. But the non-essential or optional expenses are the things like your entertainment, buying, a new pair of shoes that maybe you don't necessarily need. So allotting 30% of your, remember, after-tax net income, that can be allotted towards non-essential or optional expenses. Now, that doesn't mean you always have to allot 30%. I mean, if there's a couple months or two where you're falling more in like the 20% range, that's great, because that means more can go towards savings. So don't let yourself, I still have some room to spend to get up to 30%. If you absolutely don't need it, even though that is allotted for optional expenses, just recognize that and don't get trapped into thinking, well, it's okay to mark it up, because probably 75, I'm making this up, but I would just say about 75% of just finance and financial planning and budgeting is all based on behavior. So just be cognizant of that. And finally, the 20%, as you can see, should go towards saving or paying off debt if you have debt. And we'll get to debt management in a little bit. I have in here aim for 3 months worth of savings. That's another rule of thumb out there that a lot of people will tell you. It's something to build towards. It's not the end of the world if you don't have that right now, but it's a good goal to set for yourself. So when you are creating that budget, total up those expenses and multiply by 3. And that should be your savings goal for your checking and savings account. Some other good savings ideas or strategies out there. They differ for everyone. I wanted to focus on this one just because I like how simple it is and easy to remember. But if you're looking to purely from a savings standpoint, rather than allotting expenses or income towards expenses, there are some neat things out there like the 52-week challenge. If you Google that, you put away $1 in week 1, $2 in week 2, $3 in week 3, and so on and so forth. And you end up totaling, let's see, I think I had it written out here. Yep, you end up totaling $1,378 by the end of the year if you stick to it. There are a couple others out there, or with the 52-week challenge, if that's not challenging enough for you, you can always double it too. Do $2 in week 1, $4 in week 2, and so on and so forth. There's some apps out there for spare change, like Acorns and Coins, I think spelled with a Q. And just some other ideas that, if you do any research out there for fun ways, it's almost like making it a challenge or a game. So maybe putting $1 in a jar or moving $1 to savings in your app every time you do XYZ or something like that. Oh, okay. So establishing credit. I know that was a topic that we all wanted to learn a little bit more about. And so a lot of times you hear people talk about building credit, but some people might not even have credit to begin with. So what are some of the options out there available to people that they can use to establish credit in the first place? So a couple options here that allow you to establish credit. is ask the bank where your checking and savings account is held. They have that existing relationship with you already. They're able to view your banking history. They'll see, you know, if you do have income, whether that's from, again, the work study jobs or refunds, allowances, things like that. They'll be able to see that history, and they know you. So reach out to the bank with whom you have your checking and savings and see if they have any options. Another option out there is a secured credit card. So credit cards sound scary, and they can be if they are, I'll say, abused or misused. But a secure credit card is different than a regular credit card in the sense that you actually provide collateral. So what does collateral mean? That means you're essentially putting money up front that the bank is going to use almost like a security deposit. If you were to put a security deposit down for an apartment, for example, it's the same concept. So the bank will actually allow you to open up this specific secured credit card, and it's called secured because you have that money backing it. And the limit for that, the spending limit or the credit limit, is whatever that amount is that you put in initially to open the card. So that's an option as well, that you can start to establish credit. And as long as you make, you know, the interest will accrue on that, but, and that's going to vary from, you know, provider to provider, but as long as you are making the monthly payments on that, that is how you establish credit without actually having to open up a proper credit card with different limits and things like that. There's also a student credit card option. You do need typically monthly or some sort of income to pay the bills, the monthly bills, but they have small limits, usually probably around 1,000 or so. So the monthly bills will be like $10. But as long as you have some form of consistent payment, or you have a parent who can be on the card as an authorized user, that's another option as well. And finally, your loans. So if you've borrowed any loans, your student loans, whether that's federal or private, if you have any personal loans or car loans out there, they're establishing credit for you as well. I know loans get a lot of a bad rap, but they do have some silver linings if they're handled in a appropriate way. So that is one other piece in which can help you establish credit. All right, so once you have your credit started, how do you manage it like a pro? Make sure to pay your bills on time. Know what affects your credit score, and I'll get to that in the next slide. Check your accounts and cards regularly. This is not only to keep yourself afloat of what you've been spending and paying off, but also to monitor for any fraudulent activity. Make sure you're aware of what's going on, and it's good to check it regularly too, because if you are in the midst of, you know, you're about to swipe the card on something, knowing what that balance is and what you're going to be adding to it if you have a balance, so that you know what your next payment will be to pay it off in full. And finally, checking your credit score at least once a year. Right now during COVID, they actually are allowing you to check it more than once a year. Freecreditreport.com allows you to check your credit score with the 3 big credit bureaus. So that's TransUnion. What are the other ones? I've got them listed right here. Just give me 1 second. It is Equifax, Experian, and TransUnion. So those are the 3 big credit bureaus who determine your credit score when you go to apply for a loan, or if you're opening up some form of credit, or a credit check is performed on you. Typically, they allow you to check it about, I think it's quarterly. Right now during COVID, they're allowing it more often, but at the very least, check it once a year, because you can do a free check and it's not going to affect your credit. And we'll get into that in a minute, but there's a difference between, they call them hard inquiries, which is like a hard credit pull, what they call it, and soft ones, which is just checking your credit score. It's not going to affect your credit score. So as you can see here, I'm not quite sure why this graphic has good labeled as red and poor as green, but just make sure the good scores are on the right there in the red and orange. You're getting okay at that like yellowish, lighter orange color, which is 640 to 700. And then it tends to be a little harder to get approved for things, anything below that usually. So what affects a credit score? You know, you start building it, but you got to maintain it, because credit scores, you can't run away from them. They're with you for life. They're gonna follow you for life, much like your, you know, social security number. They don't go away. You can't run from them. It doesn't disappear if you switch banks or if you move. So it's really important to know how they work and how to manage it and what affects them and what you can do in case you need to improve your credit, and things that you can work on to build your credit within this. So I'll go over each of these. So first you have really those two big ones right there, the 35% and 30% that's affecting your credit score. And that's payment history and credit utilization. So what does that mean? Payment history, as you can imagine, is have you paid your bills on time? That's one thing they're going to be looking at. And okay, if you haven't paid them on time here and there or every time, how late were you with each payment? Because they're different trigger points. You know, within the first, I believe it's, you know, 60 days or so, that's one trigger point. Anything after that can be another trigger point for affecting your score or lowering your credit score. And they're looking into other things too, like have you ever been sent to collections because you didn't pay a bill? I know that can happen with, you know, student accounts, you know, your student account at school. If that's never paid, that can be sent to collections. Medical bills is another common one. So just to keep that top of mind. Sometimes it can be really hard to pay a bill, especially if it's a large one like a medical bill or even school too. But just know that you can't let it get to the point where it's delinquent and it has to be sent to collections, because that can really affect your credit score. And you'll have to do a lot of work, you know, working on these 5 points here mainly to build that back up. It's not impossible. If that has happened to you already, or if it does happen in your lifetime, definitely doable. But just try to avoid that if you can. And there's some, you know, again, hark back to the budget strategies and savings methods to have that emergency savings if something does happen with a big expense. And knowing that you can always reach out to, you know, whether it's a medical provider or the student accounts office at Richmond to work out payment plans, because that is usually potentially an option. So the other big one out there that really affects the credit score is credit utilization. So what does that mean? It means it's what you owe. Or how much you've borrowed. So how much of your total available credit have you used? So your credit limit, when you start establishing credit, you are given a credit limit. That can be $1,000, it can be $5,000. Sometimes when you have some more credit history, they'll automatically bump it up, which at first you're like, oh my gosh, my credit limit is, you know, XYZ now. I have so much more money to spend. Don't think like that. I have made that mistake personally in my life, and I am still literally and figuratively paying for it. So take it from me, and probably anywhere on the internet, don't get excited if they do up your credit limit. So credit utilization, how much of your total available credit have you used? So let's just say it was $5,000 total credit available, and you've only used 1,000, so that's 1/5. So you can see how that works. Just make sure you know how much you have on each specific account and how much you have in total. So when it comes to your credit score, not only do credit cards affect that, but that's, again, your student loans, That can be a car loan. That can be a personal loan, a private loan, a federal loan. So it's not just credit cards. It's any instance where you have borrowed money to pay for something. So you borrow student loans to pay for college. You borrow a car loan or from the bank to pay for a car. Things like that. So just make sure you're aware of how much is on each of these accounts, not just a credit card, because that's going to be your total amount of what you've borrowed and your credit limit as well. So I do see a question I want to address really quickly before I go further, and it was, do you recommend negotiating your bills rather than not paying your bills? That depends probably on the situation. I'm thinking like medical versus, school or something. I don't know if not paying your bills at all is ever an option. I'm sure there's some instances where people have gotten out of like a medical bill, for example. But I would negotiate them. And if you can't negotiate the amount, at least negotiate the method in which you pay. So the time frame, for example, see if you can get it extended or do periodic payments, something that makes it easier or breaks it up. You might not always be able to negotiate the amount, but you can always try to negotiate the method in which you pay it, I would say. Hopefully that answers that question. That was a good one. Okay, so the next couple factors that affect a credit score is the length of your credit history. So you can see that's about 15%. How long have you been using credit in general? How old is your oldest account? And sometimes in this example, it may make sense to leave credit card accounts open even if you're no longer using them. So the reason for this being is that they help with that credit limit. Remember, so if you have a credit card that has, let's just say $1,000 limit that maybe you used it a few years ago, but you never use it anymore. Don't close it. I mean, the only instance in where I would say, yes, it makes sense to close it is if it has an annual fee, because then you're paying a fee for nothing to use it. And in that instance, yes, I would go ahead and close it if you're not using it because you're paying for something you're not using. But generally speaking, if you don't have an annual fee associated with it, I would leave that credit card open because that's just going to keep your with that credit utilization or the amount you owe. That's going to be more on the other side of your total credit limit. So it's going to increase your credit limit so that if and when you do borrow, whether it's a loan or spending on a credit card, you still have that other, maybe that $1,000 or $500 credit card limit out there that you may not use, but it helps with your credit utilization. Credit inquiry. So I mentioned this earlier. This is essentially anytime you open new credit. So how many new accounts have you applied for recently? If it's been a lot and in a short time frame, that's going to affect your score. It may not drastically, but it all depends on how many and in what time frame. When was the last time you opened a new account? And finally, as I mentioned, they're hard and soft inquiries, or you always hear like they pull your credit, it's a hard pull or hard inquiry. This is when you actually apply for a new line of credit. And so that does, take a small dip on your credit score. As you can see, it's like 10%, so it's not a huge impact. So, obviously you have to have your credit run if you're going to borrow or try to apply for, eligibility for borrowing. So it's not this inevitable thing that you can refrain from having happen, but just know that you don't want to do it too often in a short amount of time. So don't go open multiple credit cards within a short period, or even I would say within, you know, several months of each other. Just keep that in mind. And finally, your credit mix. So again, this is 10%, and this is what are the different types of credit that are in use. So I mentioned before, there's student loans, there's car loans, personal loans, credit cards, all these different types. This doesn't have a huge effect on your score, as you can see. It's just something that they look at to see what are the different types of borrowing that you do, to see, are you a responsible borrower, you handle a loan and you handle a credit card. But that does not mean go out and open a new account or new accounts just to increase your mix. That's not what I'm implying. It's just know that that's something that they take into account and look at, but do not go open multiple accounts just to get that up. So managing debt in order to save. We talked about budgeting, and we talked about establishing, building, and maintaining or monitoring credit. But how do you pay off debt if you have debt? So that could be credit card debt, that could be your student loans, it can be any form of debt. So there are a couple different methods out there, and I'll tell you which one is my favorite, but you're welcome to choose either if you want to implement them. So they both have references to snow for some reason. There's the avalanche method and the snowball method. So the avalanche method is when you target your debt with the highest interest rate first. So if you have multiple credit cards, whichever one has the highest interest rate. If you have multiple student loans, which one has the highest interest rate? So if you borrow loans from year to year, those interest rates change year to year because the government changes from year to year if they're federal loans. So just be aware of which loans have which interest rate. And if you're taking this approach, then you would target the one with the highest interest rate first. And you pay towards this debt with any money that you have left over after making minimum payments. So you make your minimum payment, and then whatever money you have left over after you've done your budget and you're in a surplus, put it towards this, the credit card or the loan or the debt that has the highest interest rate. So the pros of this method is that it minimizes the interest that you pay over time, and it lessens the amount of time that it takes to get out of debt. That's great, right? The cons, however, are that it takes a lot of discipline and commitment, and it requires constant amount of discretionary income. So this one is mathematically makes the most sense, but remember what I said earlier about, you know, the majority of financial planning and whether it's investing or savings or anything like that, it's based on behavior, which is why I'm going to recommend the snowball method. But if you are a very disciplined person, you know yourself better than anyone. If you are disciplined and you are committed and you do have a constant amount of discretionary income, you've got your budget down pat, or you get paid the same amount maybe with each paycheck, that you can work it out that way, then sure, take the avalanche method. That one makes more sense from like a math perspective. But if you know yourself and you know, you need that motivation to make this happen and make this work, choose the snowball method. That's targeting the smallest amount of debt first so that you can get those small wins. It's all about that mentality and that motivation, that encouragement. You got one paid off, one credit card or one loan. So you pay towards this debt again after you've made the minimum payments. And the pros of this is that it builds motivation by settling debts fast, so you can check them off and move on to the next one. And it's easier to stick to because we all in this day and age have that hunger for instant gratification. We want to see things happen, and you don't get that with the avalanche method, but you will get it or can get it with the snowball method. The cons to this, when you compare it to the avalanche method, that you do incur more interest, so it does become technically more expensive over time. Over time, and it can take longer to become completely debt-free. But if that's what it's going to take to make you stick to a plan to pay off your debt, then do that method, because that's better than starting the avalanche method and then never finishing it. So finally, I want to leave you all with a quote before we open up some time for questions or discussion. It's a Warren Buffett quote, how cliche, right? But I liked it because I think it's pretty applicable to your budget and financing as a student. It's not necessary to do extraordinary things to get extraordinary results. So the way I viewed that or interpreted that is that, you know, you don't have to be a business major or have the you know, all the tools and resources or have all the lingo down or things like that. You don't have to have any fancy tools or even a financial advisor to be able to accomplish some of these things. It's all about behavior. And so if you just know how to utilize some of these basic concepts, you can get yourself there. You can work it out. You can have a surplus in your budget. You can pay off debt and you can manage your credit score like a pro. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen now and open up the floor for questions or comments. And you can come off your screen and talk. You can leave your screen or your camera shut off and just unmic yourself or unmute yourself, or you can type in the chat, whichever you're more comfortable with.
I have a quick question about building credit as a student. So I know that most credit cards, you need a solid income to be able to apply for a card, but how could you do that as a student without like your own income?
Yeah, that's a great question. Couple ways. So you can always get an authorized user, such as a parent or family member, if you do have someone in your circle that is willing to do that, to put their name essentially on, you know, a credit card. You can always be put on as an authorized user for any of their credit cards as well. But if you want your own and you want to start your own, and let's say you don't have loans or you want to start before your loans go into repayment, because your loans aren't going into repayment until after you graduate, right? So if you want to get started on that, then I would look into secured credit cards. You just have to essentially, if you recall, you put collateral up front with the bank. So you essentially put a security deposit in with the bank. So let's say you had $200, and I think there are a good number of banks out there that do these. I want to say Discover, I think Capital One has some. I'm sure there are a number of others as well. But you can actually go and you ask them, you know, what you want to open a secured credit card, or ask them about those options first. I would ask first and do some research before you pick one. But you actually fund it with whatever amount of money that you want to. And that's your credit card limit. And they actually help you build credit, even though it sounds like a debit card, but you treat it like a credit card because you have to make payments on it.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Yeah, I think Discover does have some good student credit cards. So starting early, I asked a first gen listserv that I'm in for some suggestions, and they were like, Discover is the best way to get started. So check it out anyway. You may find something better. And Caroline, I wanted to mention, if I could, there's a page on the Common Ground First Gen website that has some information about resources, and it's under the First Gens, but there's really a page on financial resources. And in there, they talk about a lot of the funds on campus that we've got, like the Career Opportunity Fund, which will pay you, you know, up to $200, I think, a year to buy a nice suit for an interview or something like that. And, you know, those are great pockets of money. So there's a list there. And there's also a student-made list called Being Not Rich at UR. It's based on other schools that have done similar lists. And there's a lot of tips for how do you shop at thrift stores in the area. And, you know, if you were to budget out your dining dollars based on this year, how much do you have to spend a week? You know, like there's just a lot of tips in there. It's longish document, but you can also add to it because we'd really love it sort of crowdsourced. So feel free to go to that page. take a look.
That page is awesome. We created a budgeting 101 page on the financial aid website. I can provide it too, but the Being Not Rich at UR is probably an even better resource because she was a student.
Right.
I helped write the one on here, but yes, I'm a student right now, but I'm not an undergraduate student that's 18 to 21 years old. So yes, check out I'll provide the link as well. Check out ours as well, but I highly recommend checking out the one that Lisa just provided because it's coming from a student's perspective. And I read it, and she blew me out of the water. So maybe I won't. I'll still provide the link here, but I highly recommend checking that one out because she did such a great job listing a lot of stuff, some things that I wasn't even aware of. So yeah, that's such a great resource.
No worry. Do any of you have any suggestions for what you'd like to see in future workshops? We might be waiting until, after disaffiliation occurs to offer more and new things. But for those of you who will be here next year, if there are specific questions or topics, we're going to try to grow this program of financial literacy next year. And so doing what you need us to do is super helpful. That's what we want to be doing.
And anything too that I can improve upon with this one in particular, or as we go forward. Yeah, open to any suggestions.
That's great. Have any of you used online budgeting tools like Mint or something? I'm curious if any of you use those, but there are great ways to just keep track of where your money's going through apps, which could be easier than pen and paper now. But
I realized that actually I was going to, and I can still provide one. We'll hopefully have one available on our website before the end of the year. Budget that you could print and fill out by hand. And then I realized most people probably like apps these days. So yes, I've used Mint before personally, and that's probably, I would say, one of the more popular ones. There's another one that when I was was a financial advisor, one of the certified financial planners that I worked with always would recommend, it's called Good Budget. He actually likes that one better than Mint, but that was his own personal preference. And I haven't played around with that one too much, but apparently it's another good one out there.
Great. And we did mention to folks we're coming, I know, towards the end of the time that there would be a prize for someone to randomly get, where we want to give away this sort of digital piggy bank that, if you ever use money, actual money, which maybe when we're out in the world a little bit more we will, and you can put bills or coins in and we'll add it up for you and you can kind of watch yourself save. So I have put your names into the randomizer, and Roland, you are our winner.
Yay!
Roland, congratulations.
So I'm confused on what it is then.
You're not sure what it is? Well, I'll send you a picture. Roland, can you put your email in the chat?
Yeah, I got you. My school email?
Yeah, school email would be great. And I will let you know when that's ready to pick up and where to pick it up. But we're happy you came, all of you. We hope that you took away a nugget. Before you leave Richmond, and if you do have any loans, you're going to be able to meet with people in the financial aid office, and they're going to give you a lot of tips about how to pay those off and how to consolidate them and all sorts of good stuff. So hopefully you don't have to think about that yet, but there's ongoing support in financial aid, and I don't think people always realize that. So yeah. Thank you so much, Caroline. Any other last questions? Roland, I will be in touch with you, my friend, and thank you to everybody else for coming tonight.
Yes, thank you so
Thank
much
you.
for
Hope
for
you
giving
learned
your-
something. Have a great
an
evening.
hour of your night.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye, thank you.
Bet. All right.
Yay!
We did it.
Do you think that went all right?
I do. I do. Your PowerPoint is awesome.
Thank you. I wanted to. I wanted to create something that wasn't in the normal U of R template
Yes.
that they have, and something a little more modern and fun. And